Are we waiting for anybody else? Nope, we got a couple more.
Picture. There we go.
There's Rick. I think we're all here now, correct? All right, well, I call the meeting back to order. 2021 Budget Committee.
So the next round for presentations is the Culture and Recreation team, and the first presenter will be Gary Wirtz, the fair manager. So we'll go over the Fairgrounds budget first, and their actual budget starts on page 29.
Welcome, Gary.
Hi, Gary.
Hey, you guys ready for me?
We are ready.
All right, sorry. Get used to this stuff here. Should be by now. I want to thank you all for allowing me to talk about our budget. The fair department, the fair is into two different budgets. One is the fair itself, and the other is the event center. The event center is the part of the operations that run year round with the rentals and everything else that happens out here at the time. So the first part of the budget is the fair itself. We plan to have a fair because we're still not, we're up in the air, but we've decided, the fair board's decided this year to go ahead and plan for it unless the governor makes other decisions for us as we go along. So basically it's pretty much the same as the previous year, 2019, anticipating all, expenses and revenues and stuff. And as we go along, the fair usually is a revenue producer for the fairgrounds. Has been for about the last 15 years. It varies anywhere from $10,000 to $40,000 a year after having it. So, and it's our whole reason for being here. So there's not a whole lot in there. It's mainly just to operate and have the fair. We've worked real hard at getting everything separated for years. Everything was just one budget, but I wanted a clearer picture of what was going on with the fair and dividing the expenses up between the fair and the fairgrounds itself. So if there are any questions about the fair itself? If not, I'll move on. So the biggest part is when you go to the second part of budget, which will say event center, the event center happens to be the whole engine that drives this place, the rentals, all the horse shows, well, we don't have circuses anymore traveling around, but anything that someone that wants to rent a piece of the facility or all of this facility can come here, and that's our biggest income producer is the fairgrounds. It helps pay for the fair and the eventuality. It's how we repair the buildings. It's how we take care of everything out here. The event center, like I said, it's all dependent. The event center revenues are all dependent on where we're going to be at. We're hugely dependent on where the governor's at this time. Right now, we can have 50 people in the Delashment Arena when we have an event. So a lot of our main shows, our big income shows, have canceled for the year already. But we're also have, for every one that canceled, we have 3 smaller ones that want to come in and still put on do something here. So the income is a potential of actually doing better than what we have in the last few years. Just dependent again on what our restrictions are and how that goes. So it's kind of a guess, but we're using the past years as to forecast what we think is going to be our income for the year. Of course, along goes with that is an aging facility as our expenses. We have cut a lot of expenses out, staff and things like that, to be able to compensate for the loss of income. That's been the hard part, because the facility needs to, when you have a bunch of old buildings, whether there's anybody in them or not, they can break down. So we've kind of been working on that, trying to be very cautious of what we do out here and how we do it. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that in the last year and a half. And, like I said, a lot of things are looking up as far as income, rentals coming in. But we have, like I said, we have the potential of being in the, having a very good year by the time we get done and, the next season. The main thing, like I said, is keep the facility up. One of the biggest reasons for that, we proved that last September during the fires, when we had over 750 animals on the property at once. The fairgrounds was ready to go for any event or any disaster that happens, that we can, we're there for the public. And biggest thing is just trying to hold the line on the, on our expenditures throughout the, year to coincide with what our income is. It's pretty simple. Not a lot to it. It's just the biggest part of the biggest issue again is trying to keep the facility up in top shape with the income and expenses. Is there any questions to that? Not a whole lot of detail, because there hasn't been a whole lot going on for the last year.
Gary, how is the lack of income from the last fair overall generally impacting your budget? I know that's especially since it's been so successful in the last few years.
Well, it's impacted, one is the revenue we would have received from that fair that we didn't have. And fairs are designed to break even. We've been fortunate in the last, 10, 12 years to actually make some money on a fair. And we're one of the very few fairs in the state that does that. And, we were potentially could have had, more income coming in. We use the income for repairs. I mean, that's the bottom line. We try to, keep the facility up. As you well know, it costs a lot of money. And any income that we make it actually goes into the repairs of the facility. So for we repairs, machinery to do the repairs. That's a big one. For years we did everything by hand out here, and I'm getting too old to be digging ditches. So it's little things like that to ease us along. But yes, was a big impact. It was impact of, depending on that income. I have things a little different, of course, come from the retail side of business. And, I try to plan my projects out a year ahead of time. A little tough. There's a lot of things we didn't get done, but as we move forward, we're trying to make up for those right now. I hope I answered your question. I probably went all the way around it.
No, that's good. Thank you. And thank you for what you're doing. You've been great through all this, through the wildfires, through all the uncertainties. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions?
Gary, this is Casey. I've got a question for you.
Yes.
I realize the event center budget is really if we get it, then we'll spend it to repair buildings. But I noticed that the event center facilities fees, the proposed budget revenue, this is 347.17 is 270,000 this year. And the adopted budget from 2021 was 123,000. And so are you actually expecting that you'll do 2.5 times or 1.5 times the amount of activity and fees this upcoming year?
I have
or
the
is it
potential.
simply to recognize that you might have income and you might have expenses?
It was more to have the income and expenses balance out. But I do know that I have the potential of doing 1.5 times more, because there hasn't, a lot of facilities are shut down. A lot of facilities, we're ready to go right now. And I have the ability to, I can open up the building tomorrow for a horse show, so to speak. And the shows that example, Oregon High School equestrian team, 3-day show, 3 to 4 day shows, that's a $10,000 weekend to us. We have the potential of expanding upon that, because we have a lot of requests wanting to know if we have dates available. The only hindrance for us at this, and when I look at those fees and try, is how many things can I have during a year? I have to factor that in. But the bigger shows, the bigger horse shows and stuff out there are calling us because, one, we're more affordable. They can't afford the other big facilities. And a lot of facilities have shut down for that type of thing. So there is a potential we could get that, but mainly it was done because of the, income and expenses.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gary.
Okay.
This question might be for Ken, but we did a transfer, correct? To County Fair, or no, the Fair Event Center
Event Center.
for 2021. Remind me again of where that's showing up.
That's 20-82-390.91. There was a $64,000 transfer of discretionary funds to the fairgrounds for the current year. You'll see it in the year-to-date actual. The 64,000, it's in the event center, the very last revenue line.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry, I was just trying to see if that transfer, so year to date actual revenue is 247,935.
Correct. I think so.
And then year to date expenses are 215.
I believe so.
I'm just trying to gauge if there's going to be more needed there, if for some reason.
Well, I hope, my goal is not to need it.
just to get you
I
through
would,
July.
I'd be,
Yeah.
my goal is to, you know, because I have, you know, I have projection lists and, you know, doing some projections and trying to come out, you know, I don't want to get us back into the habit of asking for something every year. I want to get us that we've moved, but we pay our own way, or not pay our own way. I don't mean it that way, that we can operate even in hard times. It's just who would have guessed that everything would have been shut down, the whole facility. So, you know, that's why we needed that help. But we've
Yeah,
been
I'm
very
just,
cautious about what we spend, as you well know, how we spend it to keep operating.
and maybe the numbers don't translate like this, but that leaves you roughly 30,000 to break even in your budget. Does that get you through July?
Pretty close.
Yeah, okay.
With anything unforeseen problems, that's the goal, is to break even.
Thank you.
Mr. Wertz, I have a question.
Yes.
What is your normal FTE limit? What is your normal balance of employees? Because last year when it got budgeted, it's the same totals for employees, but I'm guessing at that point in time, maybe those layoffs had already occurred. What's the natural amount?
Oh my God, I didn't think about that. Natural amount is, we've had 2 employees here. And our third person that was here was actually worked for community corrections.
Okay.
So that was done through that. So actually 2 employees, be myself and the office manager. And so we're kind of holding that, but that's going to end up probably having to change with the way things are going. It's just, the problem is with this whole thing is everything's so uncertain. How do you, you know, trying to how to gauge this? I mean, it makes it hard, you know, for an operation like this where, you know, I don't want to say the wrong word, but, you know, coming from a retail business background, this is something never, you know, you adjust your employees, you adjust your, you know, hours, you adjust your expenses the best you can to keep a business open, the doors open. Well, I'm in the same boat here, the way I look at it, the way I view it. And so I'm trying to, you know, keep that at that point, keep our levels as low as I possibly can. That's how I feel we're going to survive. Just a little history of myself. I used to be on the fair board, and I was the one that always, chairman of the fair board, was one that always had to come and ask the commissioners every year to bail us out. I don't want to do that anymore. We haven't had to do that for 15 years. I've been pretty proud of that fact because many years before we did. And I want to keep it that way. And I'm pretty proud of the fact that the fairgrounds can do what I've always thought it could do, is it can take care of itself. It can operate, you know, in a fashion that, you know, marries, you know, basically retail with government.
And if
Thank
I
you.
may, committee, I'll just weigh in because Gary doesn't want to ask, but I will. I think Gary, you know, as I was sharing during my presentation, like one of the facilities that is more readily identifiable as really feeling a significant impact of the shutdown and having these venues closed down. And keeping in mind that the fairgrounds facility already, you know, it's an older facility. There's a lot of really old buildings. And they're not getting any younger. And so where the cuts that occurred, because I know it doesn't, and that was a great question because you're not going to see it reflected in the FTEs. It's down in the internal contract services line.
Okay.
Is where we pay for the fairgrounds has an agreement with community corrections to provide a full-time work crew supervisor to help, and that work crew supervisor supervises inmate and community service labor working at the fairgrounds on normal years. But that position also acts as the primary facilities maintenance person for the fairgrounds to help keep up with landscape improvements and general maintenance of the buildings. And this is one of those areas that, I mean, we can't necessarily just close the facility, and like Gary was saying, being able to be responsive to when restrictions come up, that he can start hosting events again. I think it's going to be really important to keep the facility in a condition to where he can more readily accommodate that. And again, like Gary was saying, I mean, during the wildfires last year, this was a site that was utilized as an evacuation location. And so it is a resource that's available, and it's just one that I also have similar concerns about funding into the next year. I think those revenues based on year to date are going to present some struggles to meet those benchmarks and to balance that budget. And I think this is one under the ARPA funding. Unlike CARES Act, just a little more background between the two. CARES Act had really specific provisions that we could not use it for any type of revenue replacement for facilities that were closed. The new ARPA funding is available for offsetting those revenue impacts because of closed venues. And so I do think that it will be part of the discussion for the ARPA funds. And I do think that the fairgrounds is going to need assistance in order to meet, either we have to address the revenue and ensure that there's sufficient revenue resources that he can balance to what he's prepared in his expenditure lines, or the other part is we'd have to revise those revenues and then make revisions and make further cuts into the materials and services. And I think you'll see in what Gary has put together and presented here, there's not a lot of, this is a bare bones operations budget that's built into the materials and services. So my apologies if I'm speaking out of turn. I just want to make sure that we have a picture presented on the current situation of the fairgrounds.
Gary,
Thank you.
I have a question. This is Mary. I was wondering if you could, it's $8,000, but I'm wondering how the ambassadors' expenses last year, how their curtailment of their activities impacted this, and what you see going forward as far as that amount, which has been designated to the ambassadors.
Okay, so part of that amount takes in for the, we have scholarships for the previous ambassadors that they may not have gone to school yet, and so they haven't turned in that. So we plan to hold that money aside. So if they would happen to, be going, let's say they're going to a school, then they can get their scholarship. But that's the main reason it's at that amount. We had a couple of them that didn't go to school, held off for a year or two, and one that we've had discussions with to find out if they're ever going to use it because they're in their service right now. So that's we kind of watch that pretty close. And as the person that watches that is Leslie on our board, and she's pretty tight with that money. So
Leslie's got an eagle eye when it comes to budgets.
Let me tell you. Yeah, she looks at me all the time.
All right, any further questions here?
All right.
I was wondering, I do have one question. I was reading in the binder that we received that But FEMA doesn't reimburse for these situations where the fairground steps in and does a fundamental service. Are there any other economic reimbursements outside of FEMA that would have helped that situation?
Actually, the Oregon, let's make sure I got this, Oregon Wildlife Fires Fund, which was through the Chambers of Commerce. Actually, the McMinnville Chamber of Commerce got us a $2,500 donation or a grant given to us to help us with that. But there isn't a lot for fairs, believe it or not. A lot of the Shuttered Venues Act actually excluded fairgrounds. Yeah, that's what I do every time I look for something. So it's that's been the biggest issue, is that all this money that's out there is just not available to fairgrounds. In some cases, they actually exclude, fairgrounds. We've, as an association that we belong to, the Oregon Fairs Association, we have actually had to hire lobbyists to help us work with this. And it is amazing how many people don't realize, well, you're excluded from any of this. The FEMA money, that was the huge one that got me, because animals that we had here are considered farm animals, and they don't cover farm animals, but they would cover pets. Yeah, so.
Well, why didn't you just name them all?
Well, the thing is, every one of them here was a pet of some type. So. But you know what? With that being said, I would do it again in a minute, even with the expenses, because, people in need, and that's what we're here for. So.
It was a beautiful effort.
So it was just, it is amazing. And I'm not the only one. There's 36 of us in Oregon that have the same issues, that, provide services. The only ones that the state fair got some help because they had more people staying there from the wildfires. So they reimbursed the state fair for the people staying there. But we've had troubles getting reimbursed for anything here. So I don't know what else. We keep looking. Let me put that. We haven't stopped trying to figure out, because let me tell you, sometimes I question myself when I thought, well, let me see if I can get that through. And it's out there. You just have to finally find the one that's willing to deal with our unique situation. We are a county department, so they figure that, the county has deep pockets and they'll take care of that department. But anyone that's been around the county government knows that every department's only got X amount of dollars to deal with. As you folks are going through that right now. So they just feel that, the counties can all, pony up. Well, fairgrounds is not at the top of the list. There's other things that are more important. I mean, not that this isn't important, but there's more things that are more important, like, police, health, human services, and all that. So the people at powers be that make these decisions, problem is a lot of them have never been to a fairgrounds, don't know what a fairgrounds does. And, quite frankly, they'd be lost if they came here and saw what we did. So we try. We won't give up.
All right, thanks, Gary.
Okay.
I'm going to be the taskmaster, and because we still have parks to present.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you, Gary.
All right.
Gary.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Gary. Nice meeting you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so the next portion of the culture and recreation team will be Ben Mudge, and I see he's joining us right now, and his budget begins on page 32. And I'm also going to take this time to just acknowledge that this is Ben's first budget presentation, because he's he joined the county. Oh, was that in January?
Yeah, January 11th was.
All right, excellent. So this is his first budget presentation, and I will now hand it off to Ben.
So hello, everybody. Nice, nice to kind of meet you. I'm excited to be here for sure. And excited to talk about the parks. Just to kind of go into it, I have only been here for almost 4 months, and it looks like our parks department was hit pretty heavy because of COVID, but that's mostly due to just the lack of labor. With the jail being shut down and that sort of thing. But things are starting to go in another direction, and we're starting to get the adults in custody out a little bit, but we've had to kind of cut some of our contracts that we would normally take care of, and kind of some of the stuff that we do around the community, it sounds like. But we do have some projects going. One of them is the retrofit of the Rogers Landing boat dock, which should be done before the end of the month, which is great. That's going to start this week. We're looking at building a flushable restroom at N. Grudenfeld, and that's in the process of being done. Plus a well out at Deer Creek to give us some water, and possibly a kayak boat launch down at Lafayette Locks, which I think would be a great spot. So this is kind of what I got in the middle of. None of these are my brainchilds. They're all stuff that was kind of put on hold while I was gone, or while I was not here, I should say. If we dig into this budget a little bit, I think the first thing that comes up, and Commissioner Bershauer asked about this about a week ago, which is kind of interesting, is we did have a pretty big grant scheduled for the Dayton Landing boat ramp, which had to be put on hold. And I don't know a lot about it because I haven't been spending a lot of time on it because it is on hold, but it sounds like the city of Dayton had a requirement that if you build a restroom there, it has to be flushable. And the whole grant depended on there being a vault restroom there. So by doing the flushable restroom, it would greatly increase the cost. So right now we're waiting for Zion Consulting to get back to us to find out what the next steps are. I don't foresee that doing anything in the near future. It'd probably be 22, 23 by the time we start seeing something happen with that boat ramp, but it is in desperate need of repair, and it is a problem for people launching their boats down there. So we definitely need to fix it. Moving on, we have changes to the FTE.
Ben,
Yes,
can I just interject real quick?
sure.
So can you clarify what is happening or starting this next week versus the overall Dayton Landing project?
So, yeah. So Rogers Landing, there's a boat tie-off down there that goes north up the river, and that's what's being repaired. There's a rubber strip where the boats come into, that's fallen off. It's in disrepair, and it probably could last another year, but maybe not.
Okay, I think I got them mixed up. I
Yeah.
heard you say Dayton Landing, but it's Rogers Landing.
Rogers Landing is this week, and then Dayton Landing is who knows when, but hopefully in 2 years.
Okay.
So.
Thanks.
Then, what we did was we decided to move some FTE units into the parks budget, just because I'm spending so much time in the parks these days with these projects, finishing up these projects. So we've moved 0.3 over, and then 0.5, because we just don't have the contract work right now. So,
And just to clarify, I'm going to interrupt so everybody knows that historically Ben's position oversees two programs. There's the parks portion, and then over in community corrections, there's a work crew oversight that his position does. So when he's talking about moving the FTEs, adjusting the FTE, that means he's reducing the FTE in Fund 21 in corrections and increasing it here in 1081. So it's two different funds. You'll hear more about the work crew division side of things during Jessica Beach's presentation tomorrow morning as part of the criminal justice team.
Yeah, so like Ken said, that's where that's coming from. It just seemed to make more sense for most of the FTE to be coming out of the parks fund. After that, there isn't a bunch of big changes. We have moved some money around to cover a little bit more in park rangers and to try and keep up with our kind of our lack of a labor force. And then we just plan on finishing some of these park improvements over the next year. So that's really about all I have. If anybody has any questions.
This is Casey. I just want to say welcome. I know that you've been here since January, but thank you for picking up these projects and keeping moving with them.
For sure.
Yes, thank you and welcome. And I'm sorry we haven't had the opportunity to meet, but we appreciate you being here.
Yeah, one of these days.
All right. Well, thank you, Ben.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so the next one before we move out of culture and recreation, and I'm going to try to do this as quickly as possible. Typically, Justin Hogue would be presenting this, but like I think I mentioned earlier, he's out on parental leave, taking care of a new baby. So I'm going to go ahead and present this one. So on page 34 is going to be Fund 29. And this is the SDC Fund. And there's a couple different components to this. So in looking at page 34, the first section you're going to come to is Fund 29-39. And this is a non-departmental, this is where we take a very small portion of it, of SDCs collected, and we have it in this administrative fund for Fund 29. And this is to pay for the audit, internal legal services in those small areas. So you're going to see that in 2939. The next category you're going to come to, and you're going to see it's pretty well status quo from previous years. You come down to 29-80 is the county fair. SDC funds, the parks SDC funds that are being collected for county, is all those SD system development charges that we receive are split 60-40, with the fairgrounds receiving 60% of the SDCs and parks, our county parks, receiving 40% of those SDCs. Those funds can only be used for new capital projects, and the use of SDC funds are governed by statute and how you can use those. So it's only for new capital projects. If you look at 2980, that's the county fair, and it's projected there's a $14,000 beginning balance based on communications and Justin's projections. It looks like he's projecting another $14,000 in SDC revenue. And so then potentially $28,000 being available for capital projects for the fairgrounds. Now is where it gets kind of confusing. I'll get to the parks portion of it later, but when you come to 2981, this is a little bit different. This is Chehalem Park and Rec SDCs. There's a portion that is outside the city if we collect and act as a pass-through for Chehalem Park's SDCs. And 2981 is where we budget for those pass-through funds. So any SDCs received related to any building permits that are issued within the park district comes through planning, goes through our finance system, and then we release it directly to Chehalem Parks. And you'll see that it's an estimate. We try to do our best to project what the revenues are going to be. They had several increases. If you look at prior year actuals at 18-19 and 19-20, they instituted several increases to their SDCs where we saw that number go up. But again, we're just a pass through, and my biggest concern is making sure we have sufficient appropriation authority to be able to cut those checks upon receipt. So that's why you'll see that it's projected at 202,000, and then at the expense line for 720.16, you'll see that that same number is budgeted to release to Chehalis Parks. Then the next category is Fund 29-181. This is the County Parks SDC, and this is one that Parks has spent money out of this fund, but typically it doesn't generate a lot of revenue. As you can see, it's anywhere from $6,000 to $9,000 a year. So there's been a history with previous park managers to really be deliberate in when they spend these funds on capital projects. And a lot of times they'll utilize this as matching contribution towards grant proposals for supporting larger capital projects. And again, it's forecasted, they have a beginning balance of 107,000, and then it's projected another 9,000, and then that full 116,000 has been held fully appropriated for projects. The other part with both the parks and the fairgrounds, in order to expend those funds, it has to be part of a capital improvement plan that's presented. And you will see in the handouts that there are projects specifically called for in the parks budget where he outlined what that capital plan, but they do bring that before the board and update from time to time when a new project comes up. So this is another capital resource for parks and for fairgrounds. So any questions on Fund 29? And that concludes culture and recreation.
All right, so we're moving on to Kane has joined us. From San Francisco.
You guys ready?
So ready?
All right. Obviously, 2020 was a real difficult year. Sorry about that. Early in the pandemic, we got a letter from Oregon Construction Coalition asking us to support, innovative ways to help continue their work and continue the economy going. And while Portland and some other jurisdictions shut down, we didn't, and really never looked at that as an option. And I just really want to praise my staff for that, who, all of our staff quickly adjusted to the numerous changes, but I especially wanted to thank Tim Kadiga and Alicia Shelb, who both helped with implementing changes, and especially for Alicia's hard work on the Acela e-permitting system. She spent a lot of time training the staff and troubleshooting that system. And we would have had a fair amount of difficulty serving our customers if it had not been for that system being in place. As for the budget, it's no surprise that the first half of 2020 affected our budget since projects were delayed. Due to that situation, we had a little less carryover. The second half of 2020 and early 2021 appear to be on course and may even partly make up for some of that shortfall. So I'm cautiously optimistic for the next year. I have proposed really on all the budgets I'm presenting, they're all going to be pretty much standard budgets. Other than the carryover, or maybe I should say beginning balance, I'm on page 35. I don't have anything else to note on page 35. So unless there are questions, Going to page 36. Related to positions, I kept the positions the same as they were last year. I had several proposed changes that were adopted last year. I'm just pretty much keeping all the positions the way they are, not proposing any changes. I don't have anything in particular to point out on page 36. So unless there are questions, I'll go on to page 37. Really, the only thing I have to note is our GIS services, which is, I think, what the 5th or 6th line down. It's line 611.05. This is the roughly $47,000, and this is the only general fund money that we receive. I've always tried to underspend that budgeted amount. This year, we will probably come close to expending that line item because we have a new county surveyor, and we have some other projects that are in the pipeline that need some GIS services. I am, though, hopeful that both Lance Woods and our county surveyor, they both have GIS experience, and I know Lance has done a lot to keep that expense line down by doing some more in-house projects rather than having this money go to COG, which we really appreciate COG doing. But we've been able to do a little bit more in-house, and Jason Foos, I'll talk to him about him a little bit more later, but he's got quite a bit of GIS knowledge that I'm hoping that we will be able to utilize. So if there are no questions, I'm going to go on to the solid waste budget. I'm not trying to rush. Okay, solid waste, page 38. This is a standard budget. Staffing level has not changed. Our solid waste coordinator, Ashley Watkins, is split between solid waste and planning, doing septic inspections and planning. She was hired this way, and I've confirmed that that's the way she'd like to continue on. The only really two things on this page that I want to note are right under beginning balance. There's river bin license fee for in-county and river bin license fee for out-of-county waste. These are the license tipping fees that we get from river bin landfill. Our contract, we are guaranteed $20,000 each month as a base minimum. I'm anticipating we'll receive just right around that base minimum for this following year. And probably not much more. That's about the level that they're at. And so those two line items have stayed unchanged. Any questions on that page?
Ken, I just had one question. This is Casey, and it's not a big deal. It's just that it looks like the adopted, if I'm reading this right, the adopted budget 2021 has the 69,000 and the 170,000 flipped.
Yeah.
Is that just like happenstance, or?
Well, it's because of the money we were getting in. If you look at the year-to-date actual, I had it flipped the other way for the 2021 budget, and we were actually getting more in county than we were out of county. So I just flipped them. They still add up to the 240,000. Yeah, it's funny. I got that same question from Mike Barnhart. So
I get it now, though. Thank you. I understand what you're doing.
Yeah. Okay, on page 39. The two line items, one of them is right near the middle. It's the 670.03, the roadside garbage pickup. I have increased that over the last couple of years to, I think we were around $5,000. It's more like $25,000 now. We're seeing a lot more RVs actually being abandoned. And those are much more expensive to take care of, and we're seeing a little bit more roadside garbage. So that line item has been up the last couple of years. We haven't spent as much as I anticipated. We're only at about $4,500 this year, but we still have a little ways to go. The other line item I wanted to point out is 730.12. That's the RRR education program. And really that's our household hazardous waste collection events. And we do 2 hazardous waste collection events, and those are around $60,000 each. Ashley Watkins actually is the one that coordinates those. She noted that we had a large number of folks that had paint only that were bringing them to the hazardous waste collection events. And so she's had another paint only collection that has occurred, and that to try to get those people out of line for the household hazardous waste events. I also want to praise Ashley. She arranged online signups for a certain number of cars every 15 minutes. It went much smoother than it has in years past. I think of the new system more as like the Disneyland Fast Pass. If any of you have used that, where you just take a ticket and come back at a prescribed time, and it's really worked well. And we're doing it again this time. And I think the last thing on this page is at the very bottom of the page, reserve for future. I do have a concern about the landfill potentially closing and us not having that $240,000 a year from them. And so Ken Huffer and I talked about setting some money aside for some possibility of that occurring. That's the $200,000 at the end of, or at the bottom of that page. And if there aren't any questions, I was going to go to page 40, which usually is Justin Hogue dealing with it, but are you going to talk about that, Ken?
Then Ken, Friday.
Yes.
This is Casey. I just have a question. If you are concerned about that and the $240,000 a year going away, I know we've talked about this before, but what are your thoughts on the transfer to general fund that happens per year from this particular fund?
You know, at this point, I would like to keep it in the future. If it happens, I think I'll want to reopen that discussion about the transfer to general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I think that'll be part of the discussions to be had. I mean, we have been keeping this in here and doing the transfer to the general fund, so it's available in 1002 as a discretionary resource. But it is something that it's not going to be there forever, depending on the timing for, with the landfill. The other items, I guess before we move out of 39, I would just for those who haven't seen this fund before, but this is also the post-closure activities for the Newburgh site and the Whiteson site that are former landfill sites. And there's amounts that we have to keep fully appropriated for our DEQ permit. And so you'll see, when you see the Newburgh post-closure line at $885,000, it's because we need to have funds per the permit available should something happen at the site that requires a response or remediation. And so that's there. And then again, you'll see another 1.4 million down in a contingency line as well. And a lot of that is tied to the post-closure of those two sites. All right, and if you want to flip the page to landfill license reserve on page 40, and Ken's correct, usually Justin does this one as well, so you'll probably hear that a lot this week, but I'm going to go ahead and step in and do it. So for this was another, with the tipping fees and the funds that were received with the landfill, a portion of it went into solid waste, and then another portion went into the landfill license agreement reserve, and that's available, and it's been building up over time. And in the past, the board Past boards and committees, this has come up on deliberation for funding community requests, one-time projects, things like that. It is one that that we're seeing less revenue coming in outside of, most of the revenue right now. It's going to be loan interest, or it's going to be, the repayment of some interfund loans that we've used in the past. But otherwise, it's just that balance and the repayments coming in from the interfund loans. That's it for the revenue coming into this line, this fund right now. We do fully appropriate this. So again, this is another one where we maintain some expenditure authority for funding one-time projects or grants. And this was another one of the funds that we utilized for some COVID-related grant funding last year. If you look at the year-to-date actual, you'll see where some reimbursement that we ended up using. We reimbursed this fund with CARES Act funds for the grant awards that were issued out of this. So, yeah, and kind of new for this year, I should clarify, we built this, we only kept 600,000 in other expense, and then budgeted an ending balance of 231, which is a little bit less. We started doing this last budget year, but this was also in anticipation that we don't have a lot of revenues that are coming in here. And once these funds are spent, if we spent it to zero, it's not coming back. So we have that ending balance, but on Wednesday, when we go through the deliberation list, just know that there's actually 831,000 potentially available for funding requests or that may come forward over the next 3 days. And we'll make those adjustments as necessary. So any questions on landfill license?
Yes, I'm just curious. I see that on 28380.19, there is an interfund loan principal. It says year 9 of 9 final payoff, March 22 FFC loan. And another below that, year 2 of 10 final payoff for purchase of jail security cameras split with Fund 45. And then Fund 45 is for vehicles, right?
Yes.
Am I wrong? Okay. And I guess it just makes me scratch my head.
So what we did is the jail had a major camera update project, but didn't have sufficient funding to just pay for the project outright. So we did an interfund loan where it was 50-50 split between landfill license reserve and the motor vehicle fund. You're correct. That's where the other split is. So the whole amount that was borrowed by the sheriff's office to do that project, they borrowed money from both of these funds. And so we're in the process of repaying both of those funds over 10 years.
Okay.
I don't know if I answered your question on.
You did. I mean, I get the lending part. They're just going to get paid back their principal and presumably with some sort of interest.
It is the next line down, the 380.20. That's the interest. There's 2 lines. We have to, for budgeting and audit purposes, we have to track it separately.
Right.
So the principal is 380.19, and then the interest paid on top of that is the 380.20. And for repayment on interfund loans, we follow for an interest rates that we charge, it's equal to our rate of return on our LGIP account.
Okay. Are all of the funds eligible to be borrowed against and from, or are they limited?
It's yes. It's a little of both. I mean, it depends on. Historically, landfill license reserve, the solid waste fund, and motor pool, we typically have more funds appropriated that typically does not get spent every year. So it depends on how much funding is available in those various funds that kind of dictates whether or not we can borrow from those.
Okay. So no real black and white, you may not. do this per se?
Where we run into more issues, it's more about around interfund loans is more about the type of project and when you can borrow money and what the repayment looks like. You can do a multi-year repayment on a capital improvement project like a camera purchase or a new construction, and then and the full faith and credit, that was a building acquisition. Those types of projects, we can do a multi-year interfund loan. If we're just going to borrow funds because we're short in another fund and it's helped to address a gap, that has to be fully repaid the next fiscal year. You know, so there's some rules around the interfund loans, and it's more about the type of borrowing that we're doing. And really the only restrictions on what we're borrowing from has to do whether or not we have sufficient funds available that are fully appropriated and available to borrow against.
Okay, so do the departments initiate the request for these types of interfund loans? Or is it a solution that like the commissioners collectively come together to do, or is it a combination of both?
Well, the jail project interfund loan was actually approved through the budget process.
Okay.
The budget adoption process, because we knew that the sheriff had a need and we didn't have sufficient funds in Fund 40 to cover the expense, the outright expense of the camera project. So then as a solution to that problem, I would then circle back with the departments, because this was a communication with Ken about solid waste fund or landfill license and saying, hey, can we afford this? Is there any projects that are being planned for that would limit the amount of money that we're looking to borrow from? And then I would also have the same conversation with Russ Heath who oversees the motor pool, and saying, looking at this, are you going to spend all of this current year, or is it available? And so there's a lot of communications, and then I have to fill out paperwork, and then the board does approve that, and then we adopt it as part of the budget process.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think we're back to Ken now for surveyor.
Yep, and for surveyor and corner restoration, just talking about these two together, these are standard budgets. I made very little change to either one of these budgets. Really the only thing I have to note is since Bill Gilley retired in March of this year, we hired Jason Foose as a county surveyor, and we receive $102,000 from the general fund for the surveyor. I do want to note, Jason brings a wealth of experience with him. He came to us from Mojave County in Arizona, and he's licensed in Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, and Oregon. He's been a contributing author and editor of the American Surveyor magazine, and has a wealth of experience both in the public and private sector. These are two standard budgets, but I do anticipate probably next budget cycle, Jason will be proposing some other items, and I do anticipate he'll be the one sitting here explaining these budgets. I don't have anything to any line item to note, but I'll try to respond to any questions that you might have on pages 41 through 44.
Ken Friday, I don't have any questions for you, but I am really glad that we have a surveyor on board now. Thank you.
Me too. And I wouldn't be surprised if we spend a little bit on corner restoration, both this year and next. We've kind of let that build up, and equipment and corner restoration, I kind of anticipate will be coming along next year, and maybe a little bit at the end of this year.
May I ask what corner restoration is?
Yeah, a lot of times out in the county, there are section corners in particular that will have been lost or damaged or missing. And so the surveyor is supposed to go out and restore those corners. Or we sometimes, if the economy gets really slow, we've had contracts let out for private surveyors to restore the corners. And obviously they're pretty important for locating property boundaries. And so there's a certain fee for recording a survey that goes to corner restoration.
Thank you.
I think
All
that's
right,
all
any
I've
more
got.
questions for Ken? All right, thank you, Ken.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ken.
All right, I think we are due for another little 15-minute break. The schedule is it, so we'll take 15 minutes and we'll meet back. We'll adjourn for now.
Okay, Ken,
Yeah, Mark?
hey, does the budget committee have the 2 memos I wrote?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, I think we're ready to go. Welcome, Mark. We'll bring the 2001 Budget Committee back in order.
Okay, so good afternoon, Budget Committee. I'm Mark Lago, the Public Works Director. I've been here for 1 year and 7 months now. It has flown by. With me today, I do have Russ, who's our fleet manager, and I am in my large conference room. So I do have at the other end, I do have our office manager, Catherine, here as backup. So within your binder or your packet there was two memos that I wrote to you. One was for a couple new positions, and one was for material and services over 5% of last year's budget. So I'll start with the one with the new positions. So right now we have a road division manager who is retiring in October. That is Roy Panchow, and in October he will have 50 years working for the county, which is amazing. So instead of backfilling that position as a division manager, we're looking at having 2 road supervisors underneath the existing road division manager. That's right. I'm talking about 1160, but I'm not going to get there yet. So right now I'm just giving you a brief a recap of the memos. So these 2 road supervisors will be right below the road division manager, kind of be the field generals out in the field. Things are changing here at Public Works where the division manager is spending more time in the office scheduling. I bring him to a lot of meetings as well, so he's not going to be able to have all that time out in the field. So we're trying to give him some field generals. And of course, one medium equipment operator. We'll need 2 to try to get our working force up to 20 working crew. So the other memo is anything over 55% over last year. And that was, what I was trying to do is dust abatement. I was trying to standardize a standard program for dust abatement for the county. Well, unfortunately, we'll need most of the funds in that line item to do some subsurface reconstruction on one of our capital improvement projects. And I'll talk a little bit more about what transfer and what line item I'll need to do that once I get a little bit further into 1160. The other memo, other part of that memo was new equipment, which is needed to maintain the county roads. So we're looking at a new medium excavator, an 8th loader, bucket truck with a chipper. This will allow us to reestablish our gravel roads and our shoulders and our ditches, as well as the overhanging trees that are in our ditches that create all that backup. So that's the 2 memos. I want to talk a little bit more about gas tax revenue. So gas tax revenue was forecasted by ODOT and Oasis to be down this year. It is down, but not as bad as anticipated. So for like Yamhill County, we are down $900,000, which is from our expected revenue of 2021. Okay, to help with this deficit, counties are actually going to get funds from the COVID Relief Fund from Oregon Transportation Commission. Our county is going to get $581,000. So it helps that deficit from 900 go down to 319. So, but we really won't be hurting too much in this year and possibly next year if this COVID keeps going through, because we really didn't do any capital improvement projects this year because of the pandemic, as well as trying to get an engineering manager on staff to get these designed and in process. That didn't happen. So we'll be able to absorb that shortfall pretty easy, I believe. And as well, again, I think that ODOT and Oasis were very safe in their predictions. So one time it was almost $1.5 million that we'd be short, but we haven't seen those numbers because people are still driving, people are still getting out. So gas revenue is coming in. It isn't as high as previous years, but it will really be really good for us. We'll be okay. So any questions on the gas tax or the two memos before I get into the numbers? Okay. So I'll start on page 45. I think that's where you have it. I'm actually talking about 11001, which is the Shalem and North Valley Intersection Reserve Fund. That's in case we ever do intersection improvements there. We'll be able to put those dollars towards that intersection. I haven't really got into looking at that intersection yet, but maybe we'll in the next couple of years. Any questions on that fund? Okay, next one is 1129, and I'll have Russ Heath, our fleet manager, take over from here.
All right, can you hear me there? All right, so 1129 fleet. First thing I talk about is our revenues there. Our really only change there is our projected revenues are a little higher than last year, and so we're 12.74% of the state highway tax fund, but otherwise our revenues have pretty much stayed the same. If you go to materials and services, or actually, excuse me, personnel, we do have a 0.90 increase in FTE, and basically that is increasing the director's position in this fund from 0.010 to 0.10. So that's a change there, but that's the only change in FTE there, in personnel. We'll go on over to materials and services. First thing I'd like to note is there in 1129 is 5103. That's program supplies. We were notified this year the fleet maintenance program that we use, Ron Turley and Associates, has gone to a cloud-based program, which is increased our user fees to a monthly fee. It's considerably more, but it is proved to be a much nicer program. So we upped that from 2100 to 8,000, which is a big jump, but it is a very good program. And we continue to look at it and make sure that is the program we need, but it works well for us. And we've got a lot of history built into that program. Next thing I'd like to talk about is gasoline, 520.01. We kept our projections the same there at 253,000, even though the gas price has gone up. We anticipate that we will end the year below the 253 considerably. If we get into an issue where the gas prices go way up beyond where they are right now, we may have to do a fuel surcharge, but we hope not to do that. We've not had to do that in the past, but hopefully we won't have to do that either. It's kind of hard to project out 18 months at a time. Diesel, kind of the same thing there. The other one is 1129 542.02 safety equipment. With the COVID thing, we spent a lot more money than we have in years past, and we expect to continue to do some of that next year. So we went from 2,200 to 6,900. The other thing I'd like to note is in 652.02 is equipment rent. we lowered that from 20,000 to 10,000. The equipment rent really reflects more on the 1160 side than it does 1129 side there. So that's the reason for the change there. And that's all I have for fleet. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Russ.
Any questions?
You're
for us?
right.
You're welcome.
Okay. I'm on page 48, engineering. That's 1155. All right. So I do want to point out, I think Russ did too. So under personnel, you have director. Over to the right there, you have requested FTE. We've been changing that percentage to actual percentages of people working in their positions. So you'll see some changes there from the previous year. In this fund, we do have a full-time engineer now, engineering manager now. Bill Gilly is retired. So that's why you'll definitely see a bigger number for the engineering manager versus previous years, because Bill Gilly did finally retire, not only as the city engineer, the county engineer, but the county surveyor. So in this fund, we also we pay for an intern that comes in and works with us. Usually they are from George Fox. So that line item is 1155-80317. And that's all in personnel. Any questions? And really personnel and all the benefits or rollovers go with that. All right, go right into expenditures. I do want to point out, we have professional services down there. That's 1155-61001. That is helps a little bit with our intern program and also George Fox University. We actually, I work with RIAC, which is a Road Improvement Advisory Committee. We pick an intersection or a T or something that within the county for roads, and we actually have the senior project with George Fox actually design it from the start all the way through the end, gives the kids as well pre-practice of what to do, what not to do, and then they actually present it to the RIAC. And I kind of have a shelf-ready project, but I do need to, tighten up some specs or what have you. So we actually contribute into that program. It's a really good program. And for engineering, that's all I have with highlights. Any questions? Okay, having none. I'll move on to the road fund, which is 1160, page 50, I believe. So you'll see that beginning balance be pretty high up there. Again, that's from us not doing the capital improvement projects this year. I do want to point out under project reimbursement, it's 1160-335.12. That's our state transportation program funds. Every county, every city gets part of those funds to help out with the roads. It basically is a transfer for us. A pass through. We get that money in from ODOT, we give it back to ODOT to pay for the bypass project. So in revenue, again, some high numbers there, but if by chance that the revenue state highway funds, which is 1160-335.07 on there, come in lower than anticipated, and I've been very conservative with the numbers there. There is a couple bridge projects we have on our capital improvement project that will be eliminated to offset that cost. So I just want to point that out. Any questions on revenue? All right, on to expenditures. Again, the director there, the first one there, we've changed some actual percentages of percent worked. You also have the office manager that changed too, and that percentage. And then you have division managers right below that. So 1160-401.34. It's 1.3. That's because one of those is retiring in September, October. That's why it's not 2. But if you go down a few lines below that in the road supervisors, that's 1160-401.63. You have 2 new employees there. Those are those field generals I was talking about at the beginning of the memo. And of course, go down to media equipment, which is second from the bottom, which is 1160-505.15 is an additional medium equipment operator. I do also want to point out, go up a little bit. Sorry, I'm going to go back a little bit. So under community service supervisor, that's 1160-403.25. That's actually what we have down is called the Vegetation Management Coordinator. That's Steve Kendall. So right now he's not managing any interns or service workers. And I'll get to who's doing that a little bit later. Any questions on that page? All right. On to page 51. I'm at 1160,499.00, which is FET, sick and vacation. That number is quite large, it's 54,000 versus other years. The reason that is so high is that having that individual who has been here for 50 years going to retire, he has a lot of vacation and a lot of PL time that we're going to need to pay out when he does retire. So that's why that number is quite large. So on to material and services. Go down to dust abatement there. It's 1160,503.03. It's $200,000 there, but I'm going to need that for that reconstruction of that roadway. So I'm asking if we can move $190,000 to 1160,811.02, which is capital contract services. That's where I have my capital improvement projects all listed there.
Hey, Mark, before you move on, could you restate that one more time? I want to make sure that our team can make the necessary changes.
Sure. So, so that's 1160,530.03. Okay, it's a 200,000. We'd like to make that 10,000 and bring 190,000 to 1160,811.02, which is capital contract services, where I have the county's capital improvement projects.
Thank you.
Yep. Go down to the last one there, 1160,610.01 personal services. I want to point out, update the road viewer to 35,000. Last time the county updated the road viewer was 2006. Basically, there's a digital imaging of each direction on every county road. So what this does is allow us to actually go out to a place that could be a half an hour away from our office building here and look at a situation, look at the ditch, look at the trees. Also, it comes in real handy when we look at our mileages for our restriping. We actually have mileage markers as it's going along. So we actually, instead of driving a vehicle all those miles, we can just simply watch that video and find out what our mileage is going to be on that. So I will be coming to the, that's part of one of the things we need for professional services, as well as GIS support. I know you just heard a little bit from Ken Friday. I'm actually having a little bit of GIS happening here within the county to develop for our mowers and for our vegetation coordinator. And we're using iPads within those vehicles. So I'm working with McCog on developing those. You could call it a little bit of a software program, but it's utilizing GIS to identify where there are certain species of plants that we shouldn't be mowing over, or even where a phone pedestal is hidden behind some blackberry bushes. So that's what that's about in the 20,000. It's a little different than what Ken Friday is using within planning. Just wanted to point that out. Any questions? Okay, we'll turn on to page 52. So under contract services, which is 1160,611.02, you have different things within our identified there for our contract services. One of them is our striping. Our striping numbers are going to be going up this year, even beyond that, but I'm pretty confident we'll be able to cover that. Reason being, we're doing a capital improvement project, which are overlays and chip seals. So we're going to need to repaint that center line and the fog lines. So that wasn't accounted for when I did this budget back in January, but we'll be able to absorb that as we go on. And you have tree trimming in there as well. Hopefully with the new bucket truck and chipper, we can lower some of that contract cost that we pay out to a contractor that we can do ourselves. As I go down, motor pool, which is 1160,780.05. There is your other vehicles that we're buying as part of motor pool that is a bigger number, bigger than 5% of last year's. So we're trying to get the necessary equipment to catch up on our maintenance. So I want to go down to 1160, 780, 68. I think it's county inter transfer to community justice or corrections. That is actually a person that manages the community service people for public works. And if we ever get the inmates program back, they'll be managing that as well. So we actually pay directly into the community justice to manage that person. He's been a great help. Then you got 1160-802, 1160-811-02, which are their capital contract services. That's our capital improvement projects for the county. That's our chip seal projects, our overlay projects, and bridge projects, which the board approved that back on February and RAC in January of this past year. And again, that capital contract services is the physical contractor and building of something. So when you go to the next page on 53, you have capital professional services. That is engineering services. That's design of the bridge. That is the geotech. That's any surveying we need to do. That's any environmental. That's those costs. They're taken out of the hard costs, but we still have a total project, CPI project of, I think it was 4.5 million or something like that. So any questions? Okay. I'm on page 54 now. This is the bicycle footpath. This is 1%. The revenue that comes in there is 1% of the total gas tax that we receive. So in this case, it's 84,604. Now we will have a great big beginning balance. The reason being, I found out that we don't have to do a bicycle project each year, and that's what was happening here. So we can actually hold that money and build a bank up to 10 years. And then you need to do a project. So we really want to be able to do a proper project, not piecemeal something together. So with this budget, it will be 2 years into that 10-year bank, basically. So here within the next few years, we need to start thinking about what kind of bicycle path project we need to do within the county. So that's why that beginning balance is so high. Any questions on bicycle or footpath? Okay, seeing none.
Mark,
Go for it.
this is Commissioner Bershauer. So in terms of the last fund that we just went over,
Bicycle footpath?
no, road fund and bicycle. Was there any, in previous budgets, was there any money sort of set aside or anticipated for the Yamhillis Trail, and now that it's not moving forward, is that money fungible? Is it movable? Can it just be saved? Anything like
I know there was, go ahead, Ken.
Well, I was just gonna, the first answer is no. The Yamhillis Westsider Trail is not included in this because that proposal was not in the county right of way, and these funds are still restricted to occur within the right of way. So these would be for adding bike lanes to a road or something immediately adjacent to a county road.
Okay, that clarifies. Thank you.
Okay. So now page 55. This is motor vehicles. This is Fund 4529, and I'm going to hand it back over to our fleet manager, Russ.
All right, Fund 45, that's a motor vehicle replacement fund. You can see we're projecting our beginning balance to be $764,000, just up from last year. The first thing I want to note too is on 380.11, internal vehicle maintenance. That's where we collect the funds from all the departments. They pay a percentage or so many cents per mile that they drive each year. And we also lump sum from Public Works out of 780.05. The Sheriff's Office, we anticipate to increase from 0.19 cents per mile or 2.25 cents per mile. So we have that increase there. And also Public Works had increased the amount that they are going to contribute to the replacement fund this year. So that's the reason for the higher number there. And it's for materials and services. Materials and services basically very similar to last year. No real major changes there. Go to capital. That's where we collect the money for the grader replacement. We typically we have the graders on a replacement cycle. Currently, they're on a 2-year cycle. In the past, they've been on a 5-year cycle, but we've gotten some real big buyback numbers on those graders to make the 2-year make sense. I think this is the last year that may really make sense. We still have our buyback numbers that are really high, but I don't think going forward that we're going to get as big a buyback numbers. So but that can change. But right now it looks like we probably will request to do the buyback this year and purchase the graders with the funds that we've set aside there. And then you can see 80202, that's where we collect funds for replacing the sheriff department vehicles and public works vehicles and those things. And that's about all I have for Fund 45. Any questions?
Thank you.
Okay, I'm back up. I'm on page 56 now, Habitat Conservation. This is a fund for the lupin plant and the Fender blue butterfly. So there is a set amount that has to come out each year from a gas tax, which is $31,286 plus a CPI. So that is your state gas highway funds, which is 52,62,335.07 there at the revenue. As I go down into personnel, I want to point out the division manager there. That's not a road division manager. That's actually a park manager. He's part of the fund, and here, so 10% of his salary and benefits come out of this fund as well, as the same as mine. So under personnel, so then I go down to expenses, and on one, there's other expenses. That's 52,62,699.01. That's the butterfly survey expense. Actually, we have Dr. Hammond, who does a report for us each year. I do want to state that we do get some funds from, or we get some share from Fish and Wildlife, and they help with this report. But soon those funds are going to not be there. So that's why at the very bottom there, the reserves for future, it's a 10,000, placeholder, I guess, a little bit of bank. So when they do say we can't support that Fender's blue butterfly report anymore, we have a way to pay for that. So, and we usually get an invoice usually in May from Dr. Hammond. So we'll be getting one soon for this budget year we're in now. And that's all I have for the habitat conservation, unless anybody else has questions. Okay. Looks like that's all I have. Any questions for general questions at all?
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate your work.
Yeah, Mark,
Okay.
good job.
Thank you.
Where are we at on time? 3. We're ahead of schedule. Kane, are you ready to jump into this?
I am ready to jump in, but wanted to put an offer if folks need a 5-minute break before I jump into. And I think we're going to be a little bit ahead of schedule because I already did the internal services budget. So I'll be talking about 2 budgets. And then as soon as I finish, well, except for insurance reserve, I'll do that. That'll take a little bit of time. But when getting through those 3 budgets, then we can talk about the public hearing and the next steps for tomorrow. So I think it's good to be ahead of schedule a little bit, but if we wanted to take a 5-minute break, I'm sure we could all use it to at least stand up and stretch.
All right, well, then let's do that. We'll take 5 minutes and we'll resume in 5. Hey, Ken, I got a quick question. Got a second?
Sure.
On that last budget that we just did.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's all just complete ignorance on my part. I'm sure it's been here a while, and I value, all the animal life, but how does a butterfly survey get on the budget, and is it forever? Is it a lifelong, once you make the budget, your butterfly survey for life?
Well, it's as long as the butterfly's on the endangered species list. And that's where we ended up with the habitat conservation plan came out of a lawsuit as far as violation of the Endangered Species Act, because a lot of this Kincaid's lupin, which is the sole food source for the fender blue butterfly, occurs in a lot of the, in a number of right-of-way areas. And so we had to implement this plan in order to set up mitigation areas and conservation areas to then allow for a certain percentage of take during maintenance operations. So that's why they have to do these surveys to identify no mow zones, no herbicide zones, identify protected areas. The reason the parks manager, a portion of him is funded in that as well, is because Deer Creek Park has a corner of a wetland property that is also being utilized as a mitigation site, because there's a population of Kincaid's lupin, a pretty large area in that portion of the park, and that's used for mitigation. So we have this in place to ensure compliance with the Endangered Species Act, and it allows Public Works to do maintenance on the rest of the roadsides.
Okay, and it is that is still an endangered species?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But it's making progress.
Right. So it could change if we see
the numbers are coming back.
So if the numbers, I don't know at what point, because that's a U.S. Fish and Wildlife interaction with them, but if populations reaches, I don't know what the level could be. Maybe we could see less of the restrictions, but again, it seems like the growing patterns of Kincaid's lupin, they seem to like a lot of our right-of-way areas, and so the population could come back, but that could mean that we still can't mow those areas, because then that could have an impact and then put it right back on the list if it ever reached that point.
I personally am glad you asked that, because I had the same question.
Yeah.
I actually thought maybe I was going to ask the question for Doreen, like, hey, why do we do this, Director Lago? Sorry, I should have done it.
Well, I've been reading it. This is my third year, and I finally was like, wait a minute, I need to understand what this is. So thank you for clarifying. All right, I think we're ready to call the meeting back to order, and I'm going to turn it over to Ken to cover all on your list.
All right. So I've got a list of general administration budgets that I'm going to go over. And the first one we're going to start with is on page 106, which is Fund 1013. This is the Commissioner's budget.
I think they might be misnumbered, or maybe I'm just.
And there should be a tab for Commissioner's budget too.
Okay. So that's in the back. Okay.
There's like a jump between 106 and 134 in the numbers.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
All right. Is everybody there? I know we're kind of jumping to the back of the binder on some of these, and this is what happens. We go out of order a little bit when we're building the agenda. So 1013, basically you have three revenues support this. We have the beginning balance, which you can see that we still continue to have a really good beginning balance for this size of fund. And the second one, 380.10, that is an internal charge that goes out to non-general fund departments. We charge a percentage that both supports admin, but also commissioner for administration of those non-general funds. So, and then you have general fund money. The balance is discretionary revenue at a 1002. Any questions on revenues? But really not a lot of changes. The admin overhead revenue, that's a really complicated formula based on previous year's actual expenditures, and then we divide that up by the department, so it's based on actual expenditures and what we bill to departments. Down in personnel and line 400.01, that's the commissioners budget, and that's subject to change because that's going to be another part, and I know we haven't talked about it, but potentially on what you recommend and what you approve as part of the compensation committee on Wednesday, we may need to make some adjustments to that line. But that line, what we do is we budget for the full amount that's been approved by the compensation committee and budget committee, but recognizing that not, in years past, there's been commissioners that have elected not to take the pay increase, so the actuals could be less. And again, that just ends up being shows up in the beginning balance, but we still budget the full amount, keeping in mind because that's an individual commissioner's decision whether or not they want to accept the pay increase or not. Also in the personnel, you have the three commissioners, but you also have the two executive office support specialists, and that's Carrie and Carolina are built into this budget. And otherwise, then the standard rollout with personnel increases that have occurred budget-wise. There's not any major changes or shifts in FTE or anything associated with this fund. Any questions on personnel?
Ken, for Carrie and Carolina, so are their positions subject to any other shifting, like the 3% COLA or any of that? How does that work?
Yes, whenever typically what has been done when we ratify a new collective bargaining agreement, these two positions are non-bargaining because they're confidential positions, but we do extend provisions of the contract like market increases, COLAs, things like that from the applicable CBA. And typically it's the ASME CBA.
Okay, so it looks like there was some sort of roll up there from 2021.
Well, it's not necessarily the roll up was applied to the budgeted amount. That budgeted amount was adopted prior to the contract being negotiated. There is a roll up in here that takes into account the roll ups that went into effect this current fiscal year that's not reflected in the 2021 budget. So you're going to see the cost increase for year one of the contract that occurred this fiscal year, plus an additional roll up of the COLA increase that goes into effect on July 1.
Okay.
So that number that you're seeing is both of those roll ups. Okay.
And then, so for commissioners, we have the option of going into PERS, or we can do is it 457?
It's a 401.
401. So where is that reflected in here?
We roll those up into the retirement. It does not necessarily disclose who elected for what, but that includes both the PERS covered employees within this personnel line and those the commissioners who elected to to waive PERS and go with the 401 account instead. So both of those, they're rolled up into one retirement line. We don't budget those separately.
Okay, so since there's a significant increase in that from 30,000 to like 54, is that, are we assuming that's a PERS increase really, or?
Well, it's twofold. Anytime with PERS, you have first the percentage increase that's applied to PERS, but then it's also calculated based on salary. It's a percentage of salary. So any salary increases are also going to further compound that increase. So you have two increases. You have the increase in salary, which then the higher percentage of the PERS is where we end up driving those numbers that are budgeted.
Okay.
Is the 401k plan administered by the county?
No,
Is it just a like personally administered, or?
we have a vendor, ICMA RC, that we work with that also manages our 457 account for voluntary contributions for a deferred comp, but they also manage the 401 for those employees that we have that, because the county went to PERS in 1996, so we still have some employees. We had a previous 401, so that vendor manages the 401 account before we moved to PERS, and they manage this 401 for the commissioners or any, and it's really just the commissioners that have historically been the elected positions. It's only elected positions that can waive PERS enrollment. As part of our agreement with PERS, all county employees, all paid staff, as part of the requirements around PERS, are automatically enrolled in PERS.
Okay, so in this budget, is there also included, like, is there a matching program for the commissioners that elect to go with the 401k route?
We pay, the county pays 10% of the salary straight into the 401.
Okay,
There's no commissioner contribution. It's strictly a county employer-driven contribution at 10%.
okay, thank you.
Sorry, Doreen. Ken, what's the difference between the PERS and the 401k expense?
Well, like I was saying, the 401 is 10%, and the PERS depends on eligibility for OPSERP or tier 1 or tier 2. And that also includes, because you have the percentage, and the numbers that I gave in the budget presentation also includes the 6% employer contribution or employee contribution that the county picks up. So as an example, the PERS put out that the rates, oh, that's right, for 1921, OPSERP is 20%. So that includes the 6%. So it's 14% for the employer share and 6% for the employee share, and the county picks up the 6%.
So it's less for the county to contribute to the 401k for commissioners.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
And that's also just something further because technically it's up to the compensation committee, because it's not just reviewing salaries, but they can also look at the total compensation as far as what's being contributed. And so the compensation committee, could make recommendations on those areas as well. And then it's up to this, once the compensation committee agrees on a recommendation, then the full budget committee would act on those recommendations. Any other questions on personnel? All right. Materials and services. I think you're going to see that for the most part, it's really status quo as far as what we've budgeted in previous years. And the one that I would call out is 699.00. There's a commissioner's discretionary fund where each commissioner we budget for $1,500, and then that's, you know, enables commissioners for, if there's a community request or an ask of a small amount, or for, you know, that they have some funds budgeted and available for doing that. If there's a recommendation to increase that number or do something different, you know, please let me know. But we've kept everything in materials and services pretty status quo.
I've got a couple questions. So can we use our allocation individually to send to another department?
Yeah, if you wanted to take your $1,500 and you know, use those funds. I'm trying to think of some good examples in years past that.
Well, so we've talked about like the fair event center, you know, trying to shore up that budget.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's, where would I request that if I wanted to?
You would just let Carrie know.
Okay.
Carrie Hinton, and then we'd figure out the mechanics on doing the transfer.
Okay. And then the travel expenses, it looked like for 2021 was budgeted at 8,000. Obviously, there hasn't been much travel going on in the past year. So are those funds, you know, if we chose to move some of those funds that were sitting there, would that be something too, where they could be used elsewhere? Or?
Well, we did reduce the travel expense. I mean, historically, it's up to commissioners at the time on how much they utilize or access. And you can see in actuals that there's been more usage in the past. Of course, with the pandemic, there was a lot less of attending AOC there was no AOC conference, which is one, you know, that's one event in particular where usually the commissioners attend in Eugene, and that's where we use that travel expense to offset those costs for attending AOC conference, as an example. We did, for this year, we did cut that in, you know, when we built this budget, we cut that in half.
I know that, Ken, I know that Commissioner Starrett, Chair Starrett, and I feel like had a conversation last year, or maybe it was at the budget committee, about reducing some of these, but I do see that, I want to acknowledge it was great. I mean, it was cut in half, but as you can see there, the travel expenses, for example, was 55 year-to-date actual. So I mean, I'm open to reducing it further if other folks have those thoughts too.
Well, I spent the first, I guess, 5 years not putting in for any expenses. And I think that probably added to the large balance. But as Ken mentioned, there are commissioners who had taken quite a bit of the travel funds. I think especially with the AOC meetings not being in person, that's really cut down on number of trips to Salem from McMinnville. But I think that with the reduction in travel, if we could find a way to legitimately just go ahead and acknowledge that that money is just not going to probably be used, or what we haven't used could be used elsewhere, I would totally agree with that.
What I would probably recommend, that if you're looking at wanting to cut expenditures, or if there's something that we want to look at, the other means is we could cut, because I'm also thinking that if you're anticipating that instead of taking the $1,500 and having it built into this line, there's some other mechanics that we can do as far as reducing the discretionary allocation that comes into this fund. And we could redirect those discretionary those funds elsewhere to another division or department. You know, so that's an option too. Otherwise, we can do reductions on the appropriation authority, and it'll just further contribute to the beginning or the ending balance. I would just keep in mind that it's been a combination of things. I think the commissioners have done a really good job of, even though we have these funds appropriated, we almost never spend it all the way down. And that's really what's contributing, like Commissioner Sterrett was saying, that contributes to the beginning balance that comes to this. You know, so we have some options available. Because I know there's been a few years where we did across the board discretionary allocation increases to everyone except, you know, for a few funds that didn't need it. And this was one of those funds that I want to say at least 3 years in a row, we did not increase the discretionary allocation coming into this fund.
Hey, Ken, I want to just also call out that I've been not using my discretionary year after year because I was hoping to put it toward one big all-on-one number when it came to a youth outreach center in McMinnville, which seemed like it's been derailed. So I've been kind of saving up for a big ticket item. So that money's in there, and I want to make sure that I'm going to use it for something big at the end of the day. So that's why it's sitting there collecting interest or dust.
Well, it's in there because if it doesn't get spent during the fiscal year, it ends up in the beginning balance. So
do we know how much of the beginning balance is aggregate for the travel expense and for the discretionary funds?
I mean, when we're doing our projections, and I would just highlight that the beginning balance that's in here, that 202,000, it's a projected because we're still in the current fiscal year. So depending on where we finish out spending between now and June, but that's our conservative estimate on what the beginning balance is going to look like for 21-22. And so, and it's across the board where there may be savings, you know, cost savings that were rolled into this over the years. You know, because I will say that we do, but like I was saying before, we do budget for the fully recommended and approved salary for the commissioner, for each commissioner. Mm-hmm. And there has been commissioners in the past that have not elected to take the salary increase that was approved by the budget committee. So sometimes that can be a big contributor to this, because then that also has an impact with all the roll-ups, especially the roll-ups that are based on a percentage of the salaries. So it's personnel lines, and then it's also underspending down in the materials and services to a certain degree, depending on, I think travel's part of it. I think in years past, we've had some commissioners where we had to increase the travel lines because they were doing, attending a lot of events and meetings and things like that. So based on year-to-date numbers and what we're seeing with actuals, and, you know, and again, it's up to the board. This is their budget, and you know, so we can make changes as necessary. I don't know if that answered your question. That was a really long answer to a short.
I was just more curious about it. Like, what's the buildup? So how much has been saved and scratched away for travel? So when Commissioner Bershauer or Sterrett or Kula might decide they want to aggregate and throw something at something else, wondering like, well, how much is actually in that little pot?
That's always really tricky because we haven't necessarily, you know, because we build annual budgets, and so we appropriate the funds so it's available to use. And the $1,500 per commissioner, this is a long-standing practice that goes back many, many, many years as a means to for individual commissioners who. I wish I could think of some really good examples right off the top of my head. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank, but there's been times that whether it's like a 4-H sponsorship or something like that, that a commissioner may want to contribute $250 towards something. Right. And this has this. Keeping in mind that the Board of Commissioners have control over this entire $155 million budget. You know, so I mean, this is one part of the much larger budget. So,
Just for clarification, because I am drawing a blank on, so revenue is 395, including the beginning balance.
Mhm.
And expenses are 794. So remind me how we balance that again?
General fund. General fund, it balances to 1002. It's the discretionary allocation. If you look at the discretionary allocation table that's in your binder, you're going to see that the Board of Commissioners receive $399,003 of discretionary funds, and that's what we balance to.
Okay. And has that gone up since last budget year?
It did. There was a 3% increase included with the budget instructions.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's not a large, we're not talking about large amounts of money. I just, my feeling is that if there's parts of our budget where we can cut and send elsewhere to departments that are hurting, I'm willing to have that discussion. And I certainly don't want to impede on Commissioner Sterrett's honeypot of money that she's been socking away. So,
Hey, that's my rainy day fund.
Can we not say honeypot? I'm a farmer, so it means something different to me.
hey, I grew up with Winnie the Pooh,
All right.
Very protective of that money.
So I do think this would be something that if there was a discussion on Wednesday during the deliberations or thoughts on this, this would be a topic, because once you've seen the full budget and, that this could be a deliberation item on Wednesday. All right, any more questions on 1013? All right, we're going to turn the page to 1010 Admin Services, and now we can talk about one of the divisions that there is a need. And the first part is there's going to be a memo from Justin. This was something that he prepared before he went out on leave. So we do have an add back request, and all this is tied to our HR division. Last year, we had approval to add an additional FTE. It's to our HR, and it's sorely needed. I will say the pandemic has really highlighted because we've had pretty significant impacts to HR in as far as dealing with a lot of the leaves, the OSHA requirements, a lot of things that are tied to that. And we've been running understaffed in our HR division for a number of years. And I can speak to that directly as the former HR manager from a few years ago. So we have some challenges. So there is an add back request here. The one problem that we had is there was an increase approved for discretionary funds to 1010 for last year. But the downside is how we typically balance discretionary increases with our admin fees that are charged to departments. And the fact that we found a glitch that we need to address on our end on how we calculate that, because it's based on actual expenses and the fees don't take into account when you add a new position and you haven't incurred any expenses. So you end up a little bit behind. So we do have an ask there, but if we want to go to page 124, I'll go over admin services budget 1010. So much in the same way as 1013, it's not a lot. This has a few more categories as far as revenues go. The beginning balance that you're seeing is a result of some vacancy savings because we realized that we could not fill that approved HR position this current year. we didn't want to onboard potentially a new HR person for 2 months, and then we had a shortfall in July 1. So what we have is if the add back request gets approved, then we'll proceed with the recruitment process, and so then that way we're not necessarily onboarding someone and then giving bad news effective July 1. So the assessment and tax grant, you're going to hear more about that during the Derek's presentation, the assessor, but that's our portion of CAFA that we get. It's a CAFA grant. The $24,000 from YCOM, we provide payroll and HR support to YCOM. And so, and also I act as the budget officer for the YCOM budget. So they give us $24,000 a year out of YCOM. And then the other one is the internal services that I mentioned before, the admin services that we charge to non-general fund departments that come into this. So those are our revenues. And then the other half of the revenue that's not displayed here is the discretionary allocation that we get out of 1002, and that's where we balance to. And the discretionary allocation for 1010 is $529,803. Any questions on revenue for admin? Okay, moving on to personnel. The personnel lines you see, this is our finance department and all of the staff in finance. This is our HR division, all the staff in HR. This is my position. This is Justin's position. Yeah, so this is admin. And so you're going to see, just like every other division, we're going to see across the board wage increases associated. We have both a mix of represented employees and non-represented employees in this fund. But again, we extended the same provisions for the salary increases to the non-bargaining, confidential, and management personnel as well. So there are across the board wage increases associated with that's driving the personnel costs. Any questions on personnel? All right, hearing none, I'm going to flip the page to materials and services. And again, we kept this really status quo. In fact, almost pretty close to identical to previous year. The one thing that I would highlight is we do have some software license and maintenance fees. We were working on a project in HR for some recruiting software that we were moving along, and then the pandemic hit, and unfortunately it's one of the things that got delayed that I really wanted HR to really concentrate their efforts and focus on pandemic response and personnel support. And also they were doing a lot of support activities around the contract negotiations that we spent half of the current fiscal year engaged in, so pretty busy. So we're hoping to get that project back in the queue. But again, I highlight again, I have concerns both from a risk management and exposure standpoint, and then also a service delivery standpoint of continuing to operate shorthanded in HR. HR, I think everybody knows that that's a critical function that, and we're behind on industry standard as far as our ratio for the number of employees to FTEs. We have 3.6 FTEs currently working in support of over 600 employees for HR, and that's a lot. And I really like to see some improvements there. So I would also entertain if we want to modify 1013 and no, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to do that. So we could use some help here too.
Ken, I have a question about that. Because there's been so much put on HR as far as dealing with the leave, the COVID-related leave, is there anything that we can use to support that in terms of either another position or at least to shore up what they've been asked to do throughout this? It's been yeoman's work.
Yes. And we were able to get some reimbursement through CARES Act. If you look at the year-to-date actual on 362.12, we were able to get the 28,000, and really that was for HR's time and support of especially managing the leave program. That was daunting with the number of leaves and everything else that they were dealing with. Yeah, I think admin needs, HR needs, we need to do to add some additional resources to this, and especially having more of the technical expertise readily available for HR as well. They don't necessarily need more clerical support for it. What we need is HR professionals, additional HR professionals. And you'll see when I go into Fund 80 that we also have our other HR person, our HR analyst, and a portion of our HR manager in Fund 80. And I'm going to go over that here next. So I'm sorry, Rick, you had a question.
How many more people do you need? What's the FTE equivalent that you would need to be whole?
Well, right now, our first ask is to make the one additional request whole. Based on figures, we think we could easily handle two more HR FTEs.
Well, because of every CARE Act that happens today, there's more requirements. I mean, even COBRA has changed and how that's funded. So there's just, my son actually is chairman of the HR Association for Yamhill County, and they're getting more and more people coming to those meetings because they're all pretty much scared of making a mistake because there's so much going on. And I can't imagine being short with an organization this large and diverse. So I think to stay out of trouble and keep things going the way they should be for your employees, I think that's a critical care for the county's employees.
Thank you. I agree.
And if we were to do that, because I'm seeing the making ourselves whole, the 120,000. So would you put forth something that would?
I could do that. I could work on a request for the additional FTE and present that to the committee later this week. I could bring it on Wednesday.
Okay. Good.
All right. Any questions on 1010? All right. So the next one I'm going to go to is page 130. The tab should be Insurance Reserve. It's a good segue from risk management into Insurance Reserve. All right, we ready? Okay, so the first division within Insurance Reserve we're going to talk about is 8038, which is on page 30 or page 130. So this is the administrative portion of this Insurance Reserve. And this one does not have discretionary revenue coming into it. What we do in order to fund this is we rebalance beginning balances within the fund as a whole. And so when you're looking at the expenditures down below and you're looking at the 67,000, it's not really truly funding the whole thing. We balance to the entire fund. And down in the personnel section, the 3 positions that are here, we have our full-time, it's the classification title is a management analyst, but this is really our HR analyst. The classification title is a management analyst. The position title is an HR analyst / risk manager. And then half-time is our HR manager. And then the .2 is the business services director. So this is Justin Hogue. He oversees, this is part of the internal services. In fact, if he wasn't out on leave, he'd be here presenting this budget, not me. So, so otherwise, this is pretty straightforward with those positions. Materials and services, we have some small amounts there for materials and services, and that's for office supplies and et cetera. But really, again, not a lot being charged out of this. Any questions on 8038 materials and services? All right, so if you turn the page to page 131, now we're going to the next division, which is 8088, which is our dental insurance that we have. And so we're self-insured on our dental program. However, we do have it administered by MODA. Is it MODA or Delta? It's whatever the current name is. I've been through ODS to MODA to Delta. And it's all the same company. They just changed their name.
It's the same company.
Right.
But it's MODA.
Right. So they administer the plan. We have to make sure we hold enough funds available to pay for all the potential claims. And so that's what we have budgeted here. We're keeping an eye on this because with the we did see where there was less expenditures last year and probably related to dentist offices being closed for a period of time during the pandemic. So again, we just want to make sure that we keep, because we're self-insured, we essentially, they administer the program, but we pay all the claims that come forward. So any questions?
So Ken, why are you keeping $750,000 in reserve? You're collecting premiums, right?
We are.
Okay, so why such a large amount?
So we've collected 713,000. That's what we have budgeted based on what's been entered into the system, projected what we're going to see from revenue, and then we're holding 904,000, and portion of that is beginning balance funds, but we balance to the whole fund. Okay. So it's really we're holding $200,000.
Okay. Yeah, on the dental side, there's been some statistics and write-ups that people used about half the dental in the last year. And that may continue because so many people are off cycle. You know how you go to the dentist, you get your cleaning or whatever, they've already set up another appointment. Well, you've missed that. And so everyone's out of sync. Yeah. So it's going to take maybe another year, they say, before we get caught up. So that should be still hedging on the downside on cost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we work closely. We have our medical benefits broker that we also work with and consult with, and we have a meeting coming up here in a couple weeks. So we may have some further revisions to make to this prior to adoption. All right, any questions on 8088? I'm going to switch to 8092. This is just a contingency. And we've budgeted 250,000 in contingency. And insurance reserve, there's a lot of risk and exposure throughout this fund. So we just want to maintain, somewhat of the contingency available to help offset any claims that may come in that exceed what our appropriation authority that we already have built into some of the lines that I'm about to go over. The next one is 8094. This is our unappropriated balance. Again, this is something new. Historically, this fund has always been a challenge each year to budget for We used to, so we're balancing to the fund at this point. So when you see the 2.6 million, that is the total fund balance. And that's why you're seeing zeros built into the other. And that's something new that we implemented for this year. This fund is not a fun one to build every single year. And having done it for the last 5 years, it's been an adventure. Let's see. You'll see that we're still holding a reserve for the future of 1.2 million. Again, that was funds that we're just holding a reserve for the future. We already have all the expenditure lines built. So that would be one if the dental insurance claims, like if we reduce that budgeted amount, that would essentially just end up over in that reserve for the future line is where we would end up booking that. So we're keeping the full amount appropriated at this time, but again, we're, depending on, we're open to suggestions. So let's see. And I'll highlight in 8094, the other thing that you're going to see is, you may remember last year, the approval to do the one-time transfer from the risk reserve back to departments. And you'll see that in the year-to-date actual that we transferred 1.6 million. Some of it was for general fund, but the other portion was also to offset the jail camera project as well. We did send some funds to help fund that as well. 8133 PEL reserve. This is one of our leave accounts that we have. That's actually, it's a holdover from way back when the largest union and most of the employees were on a vacation sick leave, and that transitioned into a PTO program. So we now have a combined sick, and we call it FET. A lot of the sick leave balances were converted into this PEL. And then also contract language, they have caps on how much vacation time you can accrue, and anything beyond that goes into a PEL account. And so what you're seeing in 8133 is we have to book the liability. And so that's what this 411,000 is, booking the liability that we have for PEL, that if everybody with PEL used it or cashed it out because they're retirement eligible, because there's very few cases that you can actually use your PEL, but we need to book the liability, and that's what you're seeing here, that 411,000. So we adjust that as necessary over the years. And we're seeing fewer and fewer folks with large PEL balances, but we still have quite a number.
Okay, so that one's like an accrued liability?
Yes. All right. 8134, this is our property, what we have available. The revenue is what you'll see in 380.45. This is what we charge departments for paying for our property insurance. And so we pay both the premiums down in the expense. We pay our premiums, we pay a portion of our broker fees, and then we also maintain the 100,000 for self-insurance, that if we get a number of claims that are under a dollar amount, that would make more sense to pay for it and help minimize a negative experience rating on our insurance. We do have these funds available. We also use those funds for any deductibles as well. So to make sure that if we have a property damage claim, that we're able to make sure we can take care of those with minimal impact to the department.
Ken, what is our retention at this point?
That's a good question. I can get that for you. In fact, I'm missing a meeting with our brokers right now, but I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I can get that for you. All right. Have that noted as a question and I'll get that information. So any questions on property? All right, if we turn the page, we'll go to 8135. And this is the retirement reserve that I mentioned during the budget presentation. So in years past, we haven't done it in, I want to say, the last 3 years at least, but the board was making flat contributions of discretionary funds into a retirement reserve, into this retirement reserve, just doing a flat contribution of general fund monies into this to build up a reserve. Because thinking at some point that with legislative changes around PERS, the increased costs around PERS, that at some point the board may want to take some type of action or change to possibly use some of these funds either to transfer back to departments to help offset the costs for an increase, or if there's any. We were also being prepared that if the state or PERS itself started writing invoices to help with the unfunded liabilities that exist with PERS, that we would have funds available to be able to respond to that. So, so again, we haven't been contributing additional funds to it. The only revenues that are coming back in, you'll see an interfund loan from a number of years ago. That is in year 12. So 4 years away from having that loan paid off, but otherwise that's the only revenue coming in. So this is another fund that's available. We don't appropriate that. We just book it in the reserve for the future unless there's discussions during this week, or or if there's a willingness or a desire to see it moved back to departments or do something different, just knowing that we have that available. Any questions on the PERS reserve or retirement reserve? All right, the next one is 8136, time loss reserve. This is something that it's a small amount that's charged to departments. It's related to, it's to help offset costs. So if you have somebody if you're a department that has an employee who's out on workers' comp leave and you need to hire somebody to come in and replace that, we have this time loss reserve that's available. It has not really been utilized very much over the years. And in fact, it is something that I'm considering that unless we're statutorily required to keep it, that it might be something that we may phase out in the coming years. We kept it in here we've got enough challenges with this budget, with everything else, that we decided to leave it in place for at least one more year. But it is something that we're considering foregoing into the future. So. The next one is workers' comp. So with the revenues, what we have is budgeted amounts, which can vary because the workers' comp insurance in 380.33, that's based on the budgeted amounts that are entered into the budget. So that's subject to change depending on if the positions are actually filled and at what level. And so we have that amount that's coming in. And then down in the materials and services, you'll see this is where we pay. We currently work with SAFE, where we pay our premiums to SAFE. We also have some the workers' comp non-disabling claim reimbursement. Those are for smaller claims that we would just pay for ourselves to help with our experience. There's caps. It has to be under a certain amount before, to use those. And we have some lines for professional services. A lot of times we've used that for like ergonomics, training, work site assessments, to help minimize the number of workplace injuries. I'm always hesitant to say it, and I'm knocking on wood while I'm saying it. We've been doing really well as far as on our claims and our history, and I like where our experience rating is going. So hopefully I didn't just ruin that. But we've been doing a nice job of managing claims, and I think that's a direct reflection that not just managers, but I believe our employees are doing a nice job of working safely. Any questions on 8137?
No, thank you.
All right, turning the page, 8138, liability reserve. This is the division that handles our general liability insurance. So we charge all departments the $641,000 that we bring in to help offset, to pay for the premium and have sufficient funds built up in here to handle any claims that may result during the year. You can see that down in the materials and services, we do have a portion of the professional services is typically used for our brokers. And then you get into the liability insurance, that's our premium. And then you'll see what we booked for insurance claims to be able to handle that. We're on a retro plan. And so what they do is they make a determination on our total insurance premium, but we're only responsible for paying 60% of that premium for the insurance. However, we're responsible for the out-of-pocket up to 120% of that amount to pay for any claims. So before CIS insurance will start paying, we have to reach that out-of-pocket maximum. The downside is if you get a huge claim, if you get a really large claim, we're going to be writing, much more than a $10,000 or $20,000 deductible. The flip side is if, like we've had for the last couple of years, where if you have a positive claims history, we end up saving money in the long run because we're only paying a portion of that fee, and then we're able to, there's a cost savings right out of the gate if we don't have any claims. So, and we've been doing pretty well over the last couple of years, and so the plans worked out great for us. We were, at the time we went to this plan, we had several large claims that came out of the correctional facility. And, so we moved to this retro plan as a direct result of those claims. And it's actually, we're seeing some benefits to it. And that's why we've been sticking with staying on this plan, because we are realizing the cost savings. And I should mention, it's not just our general liability, but we also have some additional lines of coverage, some excess cyber, some excess flood, and some other areas that we also pay for out of this liability line as well. So, and then the last line is 8139, which is the medical reserve. This is a medical reserve we had in place for quite some time. And we're in the process of closing this one out because, and we're doing a transfer back to all the departments. This 144,000, we're going to be executing the transfer to close this fund out. So that's why you see zeros there. This is one that we've been carrying, this 144,000, for a number of years. And I can share more if there's questions about where the funds came from, but it was really based on what departments being a surcharge on benefits from this happened 5 years ago. And it was something that the then administrator wanted to put into place to see if we wanted to do this each year to start building up the reserve further, but there was really no further action to continue with it. So I want to transfer it back to the departments in the same manner that we received it. So all those departments that paid into this will be getting those funds back. And it's just an effort to kind of clean out some of the funds that if I were to get hit by a bus tomorrow, that I'm probably the only one that had the knowledge or the background on the origin of those funds. So it's one of those that I like to clean up various portions of the budget document. And this is one that I want to get cleaned up, get the funds back to the departments, and then zero this account out. And that is probably the quickest I've been through Fund 80. Any questions on Fund 80? I know I covered a lot there. And
you did a great job, Ken, but probably Rick is the one who loves it the most of all of us. I'll just say, I'm guessing.
Sure, it wakes me up. No, I liked it. Yeah. There's just a lot of reserves, and I would love to look at the activities, the claims, to keep looking at that so that you're either needing to up your reserves or do what you're doing with this last one we talked about, is shift some money over to other places.
Well, and this was one because in a few, I want to say it was when we went to the retro plan, the board at that time, we were having a lot of discussions about at what point, because we're close in size to the larger counties that are 100% self-insured. We're not quite at that level yet. And some of the discussions that were had and some of the actions that we did in previous budgets was to transfer more funds into Fund 80 to start working towards the eventuality that we may want to go self-insured. At the time, before we went on the retro plan, we were also concerns about whether or not we were going to be able to obtain liability insurance with several large claims that happened. And so it was a necessity. And last year we did that transfer, that large transfer out of the risk reserve back to departments. But it's an ongoing discussion. It's a great question to have every year. And I think it's ultimately is that decision if we still want to continue to build this reserve up with the being able to possibly go self-insured at some point, or we're just going to continue to realize the cost savings on the retro plan, which my thing is the retro plan is as close as we can get to self-insured without going self-insured.
Yeah. No, I like your position. Yeah, it's a good one.
Great. Any other questions on Fund 80?
Yes, I hate to say it.
Oh, go ahead.
This is, I haven't totally wrapped my brain around 8094. Is this, how many places does this unappropriated balance cover? Is it for all departments, all funds, or is it?
It's just Fund 80.
Okay, so I guess I don't get it.
Oh, the unappropriated balance. So what we do is, as part of a budgetary exercise, is we take all the unspent funds and all the various divisions within Fund 80, and we are now projecting those and booking those to the unappropriated balance, and that's a revenue line. So we use that to balance with all the other revenue lines and the other divisions to balance the entire fund.
Okay, and I guess that's kind of what I was wondering. So this is the revenue piece, but it traces back in through the other departments' line 80s.
Yeah, and it's all isolated to Fund 80. So it's all those divisions that we went over, 8038, 8088.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
it's not budget wide.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good question.
Okay. I do have a couple more that I can go over. I'll just keep charging forward. The next page is page 134. And this is 1002. You've heard me reference it a lot today. This is the discretionary revenues that was part of the slide that I had earlier this morning. So we have, as you can tell, this is all revenues, and these are our general fund. that funds all the general fund departments, and we do the discretionary allocation. So the first thing I would call out is you'll see the beginning balance, the 2.8 million is what we have projected. And typically what contributes to that beginning balance, a lot of times it can be the current taxes. Some of the revenues come in higher than what we originally projected. And so then that contributes to the beginning balance. The beginning balance reserve line, again, we had a reserve for the future budgeted last year. Anytime we budget to an ending balance or a reserve for the future, under Oregon budget law, we cannot spend it during that fiscal year. So what you're seeing is that amount that we held in a reserve for the future line when we adopted the 2021 budget. And so now that's coming forward into the 21-22 budget, the 301.02 beginning balance reserve.
So is it always kind of this size, or is it extraordinarily larger because of the way the last year went?
It can vary. I think this has different factors that come in. If the revenues come in higher than what we had budgeted, it'll contribute to it. It also can be impacted depending on if there's no further discretionary allocation approvals during this week and prior to budget adoption, that number could come down or could go up if we're cutting appropriation, if we're cutting a discretionary allocation. So I would say it's pretty typical. We try to be very careful with these discretionary revenues because, like I said, you know, in the earlier presentation, if you look at the, we allocate 28 million is the current total allocation to all departments that receive general fund monies. I'm looking at the discretionary allocation table. So 28,582,000, yet our property tax collection is 24 million. 24.7 is what we have budgeted, plus the additional increases down below. So it's something we always keep an eye on, that discretionary allocation. And we've been able to be pretty effective, pretty conservative budgeting numbers on our projected revenues. I like seeing beginning balances. It makes me happy because, you know, I definitely don't want to see a negative balance or come in under the mark, because then we're having to make further cuts. You know, so I would say, you know, if you look at the actuals from previous years, it's pretty consistent. But I've been the budget officer since 2019, and I will say that sometimes, depending on who the budget officer and the board and the budget committee, that those numbers can fluctuate a little bit because it's a different perspective that's brought to building the budget. So I'm one, I like to get close, but I also don't want to gamble, you know, with these budgets, because I'm keeping in mind the long-term effects and making sure that, because I know this was part of my presentation last year during the budget process, but anytime, you know, in my experience and what I've observed is anytime that there's an economic downturn, it seems like there is a lag time when it comes to county governments and in a lot of governments. And it just has to do with the nature of our revenue streams and the services that we provide, that sometimes we won't see the full impact to our revenues, maybe not as immediate as a business or even a city where half of their programs might be recreational programs and they're shuttered, that we'll start to see some of the, I think, COVID impacts in the coming months or years, depending on how prolonged the lockdowns and the economic conditions are. So
Yeah, that makes sense. So a lot of things are just cyclical. The way summer programs would be more active in this part of the world, or, you know, whatever.
Yep.
The fair goes on at a particular time, so to speak, and so does everything else, right? So that makes sense.
all right, and so kind of going through, we have a lot of the, like I talked about earlier, a lot of the lesser taxes, we get revenues for, cigarette tax, the liquor tax, marijuana tax. Thanks everyone. On one hand, you hear an HHS presentation about prevention and limitation, and here I get to talk about the revenues associated with, some of those items. So,
Can I ask a question about that? So I'm looking at the prior year amounts, and we're hearing that marijuana and liquor taxes are because consumption has been up during the past year. Do we anticipate those numbers being significantly higher?
I will speak to the marijuana tax in particular has been a tough one to forecast because that's relatively new. I want to say that came out where we started seeing the first allocation may have been in 18-19. And we're not getting really good projections because there was some OLCC payback and some other things. That one's been really hard to project. And that's why we stayed really conservative about what we're putting into those lines, because we just haven't had enough history of the trends of what the marijuana revenue is really going to look like. And then always keeping in mind that anytime the legislature, they could be diverting funds from this, or there could be some legislative actions. I'm not anticipating any, but you're right that a lot of the information and trends, we could see it come in a little bit better. We did up that compared to what we had budgeted last year by 100,000. But again, it's an educated guess on what the actual revenues are going to look like. And what's going to get dispersed to the county. Same thing with the liquor tax, with the alcohol. You can see actuals in 18-19 and 19-20 were 611, 657, but our year-to-date actual is 493. And some of that depends on when the funds are released to the county to trend that out. But we're just trying to be really conservative. In what we put in those lines, because I don't want to necessarily, I would rather over collect than under collect. And I think we're going to be pretty close to these numbers on both of these lines. And then anything that comes in above that would end up being booked as into a revised beginning balance.
Ken, can you talk to us about the property tax versus the accounts receivable? How late are we as good as we did last year in collections, or are you seeing any significant issues with COVID?
Oh, Derek's going to love that question when he presents. The assessor, our collection rate I want to say Derek's last presentation, I don't want to hold it. I want to say we're at 90%. I mean, we're pretty high as far as the collection rate goes right now for the current year. And so the numbers that we have built into here, we have a formula that we use that we budget a 95% collection rate. I'm grabbing my notes right here so I can make sure. So for the property tax, we do build in some variables in that. On that 24,729 that's in there, that we have it at a 95% collection rate, and then we also apply a 3% discount. So we take some of those factors in play just to make sure, and we work closely with the assessor who helps us with these numbers and projecting what we need to budget for next year. Because then there's also the appraisal, any increase in the appraised value of the property. And Derek loves to talk about these, and Derek Wharf is our expert, and I'm sure he'd be happy to. I know he presents tomorrow afternoon, so that's our total revenues that we have for 1002. We do keep 500,000 in other expense, and in most years, what we'll typically do is we use this to be able to transfer departments that may have a need for additional appropriation authority or may have a project or need some assistance. Much like when we were talking about the fairgrounds, we transferred $64,000 of discretionary funds to the fairgrounds. That would have come out of this appropriated line in the current year. And then the rest is booked to reserve for the future. And you can see that we have, based on the discretionary allocation that we've put together, the initial discretionary allocation that departments built their budget on versus what we have projected for the revenues, we have $3 million, just over $3 million available for reserve for the future. And that's going to be one of the things that are going to be on the deliberation list for Wednesday, as one of those revenue resources that when you're considering the various requests that have come forward over the next few days, if we use discretionary revenue, it'll reduce that reserve for the future line here. Sorry, that was a lot of information and hopefully that made sense. It's getting long in the day and I appreciate everybody still tracking. Sir, any other questions on 1002? If we want to flip the page, I'll see if we can get us a little bit ahead of schedule on some of the presentations. The next one is 1090. This is transfers, and this fund is where we book all the discretionary transfers at a Fund 10 to non-general fund departments. So you're going to see a transfer to Community Corrections 900.03, and that $227,000, it's to pay for misdemeanor supervision in adult parole and probation, because their state grant and aid does not pay for the supervision of misdemeanors. And so the board many years ago started transferring for certain misdemeanor cases that they still wanted to have PO supervision on. I'm thinking of domestic violence, some of the more assault crimes that were tied to that are misdemeanors. The capital improvement, this is the allocation that goes to Fund 40 for supporting facilities maintenance, capital improvements, jail maintenance, and software reserve. And so that's the 1 million that gets transferred off the discretionary allocation table to Fund 40. 90-900, this is the transfer to HHS that Lindsay spoke of. A lot of this goes to public health, and a portion of it, I believe, also goes to veterans. And that's all we had budgeted for this year. But depending on what the committee approves, if there's any increases in discretionary allocation or to any of these departments, this is where we would book those transfers from Fund 10 to Fund 21 to Fund 16 and etc. So hopefully that makes sense. This is really just to document and track our transfers to go to non-general fund departments. Any questions on 1090? All right, we'll turn the page. So 1092, this is a general fund contingency, and we have a 500,000 is what we've budgeted for this year. This would be another one that, if we wanted to reduce, it's going to be on the deliberation list. Depends, we budget general fund contingencies just to make sure there's some steps that you have to go through. It's not fully appropriated. It requires a board action, or if it's over a percentage, if it's over 15%, requires a supplemental budget. So there's a board action. This isn't fully appropriated, and it's just a means to make sure we have contingency funds for any unexpected emergency or disaster that may come up during the year. Any questions on 1092? I think that is all of the internal services and admin budgets.
Wonderful.
All right, so that's all we had for presentations for today. All. Yeah, I know there was a lot. So as far as the next step, the next item we have on the agenda for today is at 5:30. We have the public hearing that we do every year. It looks a little bit different than in past years. 3 years ago, when we were still meeting in room 32, it was a public hearing. People would come and make funding requests, provide comments on the budget. It was a pretty lengthy evening. In light of the pandemic and everything else and the limitations around the virtual meetings and being able to navigate the public testimony, we did a notice. As part of our notice, we asked for written comments. And so we're in the process of monitoring, because folks have until 5 p.m. They have 12 minutes to submit any written comments or requests to the committee. And when we open at 5:30, we'll essentially open the public hearing, acknowledge the written comments. I'll help do a recap of the comments that we've received, and then we'll close the hearing. And that satisfies our first round of hearing requirements.
So then, Ken, what we'll do is address those submissions that we've got in our binder and anything that has come in subsequent to that.
Correct.
And it's just informational discussion. We're not doing any decision making tonight, correct?
No, essentially, for the hearing, we're just going to acknowledge the receipt of the public comment, and we'll run through just really quickly, not get into the details, but just highlight this is the requests that we've received or the public comments we've received. And we will forward all of those to the full committee, and it'll go on the deliberation list for Wednesday on how you want to proceed. And that's where the deliberation and decisions will be made on the individual requests on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. All right, so are we done for this portion?
We are done until 5:30 for the public hearing, and and it looks like it was sent out as a separate link. So Carrie Hinton, so it won't be the same Zoom meeting link. It's separate because it's a public hearing, so we need to record it different and have a different recording.
Okay.
So if anybody didn't receive that or have questions or are not sure, if you want to shoot me an email, we can resend that and make sure everybody got the Zoom invite.
Okay, well then we will adjourn at 5:30 this evening. See you all then.